football in Indiana is thriving, and basketball is kind of, Purdue's certainly not. And I know the injury hurt early on, and they had to get right win today against Toledo, but they've certainly had their druthers this year. Then Indiana just kind of blows, and I believe that's just become who they are. They're just not great. But when you look at both of them, CJ, bigger disappointment in your eyes this year and more explainable, Purdue or Indiana?
I think it's clearly Indiana. I mean, Purdue has played one of the best schedules in college basketball. The ran off the floor by Auburn last weekend, but who hasn't gotten run off the floor by Auburn? Like they're doing that to a lot of people. The close loss to A&M, a road loss to Penn State, who's a pretty solid team, a road loss to Marquette. Like those are all explainable losses. They've got the Alabama win in there. They've got a win at home over Maryland. Like the resume is not that bad, especially after you lose maybe the best player in your program's history. So, I think Purdue right now, where Purdue is, if you had told Matt Painter before the season he'd be 9-4 at this point, he'd probably be like, I wish I was a little bit better, but I probably, he might have taken that, with the schedule they have. So I don't think Purdue's necessarily been disappointing, but Indiana was a preseason top 25 team. It really made a point to go in the portal and spend some cash and get some, guys that we've heard of before, Miles Rice, Omar Ballo, return Mbako, return Renault. Like that was a team that you looked at on paper and you could talk yourself into them being a Big Ten contender. And, they haven't played to that at all.
It's Indiana by a mile. It's Indiana by a country mile. And I've said this because, and I'll say this about Purdue. Purdue, you talked about it. They lost Zach Edey, and I said this early in the year, and the Purdue fans got all upset, and I don't give a crap. You're going to take a step back. And what I meant by that is you were the most dominant program in the Big Ten, and it wasn't even close. You dominated the league for 2 years. That ain't happening. You went to the national championship game last year. That ain't happening. You're a solid team. You're gonna win some, lose some in the Big Ten. That's all it is. You're a good. Let me take that back. You're a good team, but you're gonna be up and down. And you've shown that this year. You're relying on your big three. Credit to you, Coach Pingle is one of the best in the business. It's just impossible. It's impossible to replace that. What you lost in Zach Edey. But Indiana, come on, man. It's like we got to talk. It's not even close with them. And it's because the expectations at Indiana is always to get back to whatever it was, and we've been talking about that. It feels like forever. Whether it's roster construction, whether it's how the pieces fit together with Indiana, we don't know. But they've had some freaking horrendous losses, and you just don't know what you're going to get from one game to the next. And I hope Mike Woodson figures it out. But there's players, and then Oumar Ballo doesn't play, whatever that is, whatever that's about. You got some disciplinary actions going there, so that doesn't seem well. That seems that gives out a stench that there's a lot going on in Indiana, that this team is more likely to implode than respond and make a run in the Big Ten and never live up to those expectations. So I don't know how they have. There's nothing we've seen so far this preseason to make us think Indiana's figured it out.
I just feel like we've been having this conversation for 20 years. I feel like this conversation is a never-ending saga at Indiana. Like you and I and CJ all remember the Candy Stripes. We all remember Bobby Knight. We all remember them, winning big prizes and championships. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, like CJ's son that just came in, he's got no reference of Indiana ever being good. I mean, you're going to have 18-year-olds that they just don't know, because Indiana we've had this conversation every year. I think back to that year where Tom Crean had that one seed with what's that big center that he had? I forget his name, but
Zeller.
You think about, like, outside of that, what the hell have they been? And they only went to the Sweet 16 that year. They're constantly failing to meet expectations. So I think the question really becomes, should their expectation level, and I got to believe, honestly, that football makes this worse with what they just saw with their football program, and it makes it more inexcusable, Randolph, that we're watching this with Indiana basketball.
Listen,
which should be.
I said this. I said this a while ago. I said this before. Indiana's a victim of the expectations to what that program has been, and I know because now they have NIL, and everyone thinks like, all right, we got this money, and we're Indiana. Well, a big part of Indiana being what they were built off was keeping a local talent there, getting the players that were homegrown, staying in Indiana. And I don't know if that's been the case, but that's a lot of teams are dealing with that. So, right, I can say the same. There's a lot of teams across the country where I think the expectations, the programs have changed right now, and they have the resources to get back to that. Could they get back to it? It's a great environment, but for whatever reason, why is it not resonating with the kids to go there? They've had some pretty good coaches. We're not talking about one or two coaches stint here, and they've had some success. And that's my point. What are we talking about when we say with Indiana? What's success in Indiana? Are we holding them to a national championship standard? They ain't been close to that in God knows how long. So if we're holding them to that, or just a good program, where do we rank Indiana? Because if we're holding them in the last 20 years, what are they?
Average.
Well,
that's what they are.
It's still a really good. It's still a really good job though, because they have the fan support.
It's a great job. It's a great job.
You've seen they're willing to spend.
I'm not saying it's not. But
you got to hire the right coach. You know, I think they made the mistake that some schools make, that you try to go in the family. You know, you went and got an NBA guy, and you know he deserves, you know, an opportunity to see if he can turn this thing around this year. But I'm sure a lot of Indiana fans will want to have that conversation when it comes to you know, late March, early April. Is it time to move on?
That's the only. Listen, I don't disagree with you guys, and let me be clear, crystal clear, what I'm saying. Indiana's an unbelievable job. It's a great job, but it's also one of those jobs that when coaches are available, are they beating down the door to say, do I want to go there and live up to all the expect? Is everything there that I think I want to deal with or need to win championship? Like coaches, you didn't hear when these coaches are moving around, you don't hear about anybody saying they want to go there. Is it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because when everybody keeps coming at you, when it's one coach after another, and it's, you know, nobody's ever happy. And I think in this era too, this NIL era, people's willingness to wait and see something develop is closing, because in the past maybe you have a down year, like look at Mick Cronin last year. He had a down year, but this year you can get it back together. But what's hard now, I think, is if you have a couple bad years in a row, like Indiana's looking like they might have, and this past year the donors stepped up and they gave them money to spend. Well, when you go back to them next year and you say, hey, we need another, you know, however many it is, $5-6 million to spend, they're going to say, well, we don't want to do that. And they're going to say, well, what will it take to get you to get there? And a lot of times those guys are going to say, hey, we want a new coach. That we want that, and that's
fine. But guess what? Yeah. Every coach in the country, every coach in the country is going to do that. Every program is going to do that, right? When you're now Indiana has the money, then what I'm saying is, then pony up and like BYU did and get dudes. Mm-hmm. And you want to get, everybody wants the perfect coach. Like everybody wants the Nick Saban, saying it's the right coach. Like if it was that simple, everybody would do it. But for whatever reason, why aren't coaches and why aren't players? And it reminds me of this, and I've said this about Texas, right? Who has more money and resources around in Texas? But there's a level of expectations of Texas basketball where Indiana is different. Historically, Indiana is a national championship program. But it hasn't been that in these kids' generation, this younger generation. That's not it. They don't hold on to that. There are certain programs like that, and I'm not saying this to be bit dismissive or disrespectful to Indiana. I can say the same for Georgetown. These kids don't remember when Georgetown was going to the national championship. It's an entire different generation. Cooley is trying to change a culture, and that's all I'm saying with Indiana. Like you got a generation of kids that are like, man, we ain't tripping about no Indiana basketball.